Hello and welcome to a Monday edition of the Managing Madrid Podcast. I'm your host, Kiyan Sobhani. Today I'm joined by Matt Wiltse, the one and only, and we're kind of, I guess, halfway through the international break now. So there's not much going on. There is just the international games, which are being covered on managingmadrid.com in written form. We're not going to dive too deep on that in podcast form. But we are going to talk about Real Madrid. We're going to talk about some tactical things and our lack of striker. And I think most of our patrons know at this point because we've done a bunch of patron podcasts. But for those of you who are not aware, I have braces now. So it's been a little bit challenging to push my words out and avoid the lisp that I currently have. I'm told that it will, once I acclimatize myself to it, like after a couple of weeks, it should get better. But for now, this is kind of what you get, and I just wanted to put that out there. That's why I'm struggling a little bit with some of the S's and some of the words that I put out. Doesn't matter. We're here now. Matt Wiltse is also here. Matt, how are you, my friend? What's up?
Hey, Kiyan, doing well. Yeah, I'm excited to talk in verbal form about the article I wrote the other week and kind of extrapolate that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I try to do this as much as I can. Whenever someone writes an article on Managing Madrid that's, not news, but it's a little bit thought-provoking, and there's some analysis behind it, some data, some visuals, whatever, I like to have them on the podcast to just talk about the article. So Matt's article is on managingmadrid.com. You can go read it. It's called Real Madrid's Unconventional Offense, Prolific Dribblers Ready to Defy Critics. So this has, to a lot of fans from what I've seen in the comments, brought some solace, some comfort, some optimism to fans who are understandably very worried about our striker situation. So you brought a different perspective to it, which I thought was interesting. And you kind of just outlined why maybe it's not that big of a deal this season, which is kind of a shocking take, just if you put it that way without explaining why you think that's the case. But I'm curious, Matt, did you feel this way before the season started, or did you feel like once you saw the first 4 games, maybe that kind of twisted your arm and made you more positive?
I don't know. It's hard to put an exact thought on when I started feeling like this. I think I liked everything we saw from preseason for the most part. Like, I thought it was exciting. And I think throughout preseason into the season, I don't know if I've been part of a small minority or not, but I've always I felt excited about this team, and I felt it was something fresh. It was something new. And I liked a lot of what we had seen going into it and to start the season. And I remember seeing a graphic floating around on my timeline kind of early on before the season started, showing 2022's best dribblers. And 3 of our players were on the top 10 list for 2022: Vinicius Jr., Jude Bellingham, and Rodrigo. And so I thought to myself, you have 3 of the best dribblers in the world in your attack. Like, that's going to be a differentiator. I don't care if we don't have a striker. Like, that is a differentiator, to have players that can beat other defenders, those opposing them, off the dribble. It just makes such a big difference. And so I started digging kind of deeper into the numbers and the analysis, and came away feeling more and more encouraged and feeling like kind of my initial sentiments were in the right direction. Like, there is stuff to be excited about here. And I think Ancelotti's done a nice job of really playing on that and really putting these guys in the most dangerous position possible to capitalize on basically their dribbling skills and their technique.
Yeah, I've actually really liked what I've seen from Ancelotti in his way of orchestrating how all this works. I've seen him get criticism in these past 4 games, and I think that's pretty unfair, because I think in terms of maximizing the output of Bellingham and also just making it work without a striker, I think he's done a really creative job in making Real Madrid create chances. I did want to I will say, as much as I liked your article, I thought you were a little bit bullish and more optimistic than me about the scoring department. So in the very first paragraph, you state Real Madrid will score goals, buckets of them. There will be an ingenuity, unpredictability, and eccentric flash in the final third. So I agree with most of that. I don't disagree with any of it fundamentally, but I don't disagree that Real Madrid will score goals. I don't disagree that there will be ingenuity, unpredictability, and eccentric flash in the final third. The part I'm a little bit more pessimistic about than you are about the buckets of goals part. I don't know. I guess time will tell. I think if you put a striker in the mix with these three incredible dribblers, maybe you could do a 4-2-3-1, whatever it looks like. I don't know, but I think if you had that insurance policy just of an actual goal scorer, that would make me more confident. But the buckets of goals part, what makes you so, I guess, bullish on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you aren't the only one that had that assessment or that kind of pushback, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. I just think that these guys are going to produce such a large volume of opportunities that the goals will come even if they miss a bunch. And that's why I actually wrote kind of towards the end of the article that I wouldn't be surprised. You could make the argument that this team actually underperforms their expected goals, but still scores over 75 goals in La Liga this season. And that's just because of the sheer quantity of chance creation rather than like having a good, like we don't have a goal guzzling number 9. We don't have that strike. I mean, Joselu obviously, but it's not the same as Karim Benzema or strikers of the past in Real Madrid history. And so I think it's just going to be a little bit different. And I think it's not like these guys don't know how to score. It's just that it's not kind of something that has always been their main responsibility. And I think now, just given again, the volume of chances, I think that's going to be the main difference. And that's why I'm bullish on it.
Well, I think it's interesting to note about the three dribblers thing. I remember thinking about that in the summer too. And even before that, when we knew Bellingham was the best dribbler in the Bundesliga, analytically speaking, you couple that with Rodrigo, who is arguably on par with Vinicius, at least if you break it down with the to the like per 90 and not look at the total volume of dribblers, because obviously Vinicius played more last season, so obviously his volume will be higher, but the successful take-ons per 90, I believe, was pretty on par the last time I looked at it, last season anyway.
They're all in the 97th percentile or higher.
Right.
Versus other wingers or forwards. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So either way, like, the bottom line is you have these three elite dribblers who can break lines and create from nothing, which is invaluable when playing against a low block. I'd like to see, I mean, like, we won't really know until the season ends, obviously. Because I was going to say, like, we won't even know. Like, Christmas is not even a measuring stick for me because so many of these games are not with Vinicius. Because I think this is contingent to a large degree with Vinicius being on the field, and he's not going to be back until around mid-October. So you'll have that entire sample size without Vinny. And then, like, maybe from mid-October to Christmas, you have like a decent, like, sample size. Still not enough to me to say, like, okay, this team is really good. It's obviously way too early to tell. We're 4 games in. I was like, just out of curiosity, I look without really putting too much weight into it. But if you sort it per game, Real Madrid's XG is slightly better, but pretty much on par with last season per game. It's basically just over 2 goals per game, our XG. I also think, Matt, one thing to remember is we didn't really have Benzema last season. If you break it down for the whole season, how much was he actually on the field? The entire stretch before the World Cup, we were playing without a striker. We basically have replaced our front three before the World Cup from Fede Valverde to Bellingham, because it was Vinicius, Rodrigo, Fede Valverde for the majority of the games before the World Cup. So, it's not like I for that reason alone, we might actually surpass last season's goal tally because, it's not like Benzema was on the field that much.
Well, yeah, I think you bring up a good point too. Just like, I think the caveat I would put for my article and the point I was trying to make is health matters. And that's kind of been the big question around this team is like, okay, Vinicius goes down, then all of a sudden Rodrigo goes down, and then you're really starting to go down the depth chart. Then there's a question of like, okay, what can this team really do? That's where I'm like, okay, 80 goals, maybe not happening if you lose those two. So injury, health does matter. I would say this though about Rodrigo. I was looking at his numbers throughout this project, and just to start the season, he's been incredible. He's tops the list in first in La Liga and carries into the penalty area, first in La Liga in progressive carries, first in La Liga in progressive passes received, first in La Liga in total shots, and then he's in the top 10 of a bunch of other categories, including successful take-ons, carrying distance, expected assists, and non-penalty XG per 90. So Rodrigo is killing it right now. Yes, he hasn't scored all the goals we've expected to him in these games, but he's been great, I think, to start the season. I think he'll continue to be great. I think you look at his numbers and you look at all his underlying numbers, you compare them to other forwards and wingers, he's amongst the very best in the world. And who are you going to sign in the market to replace him besides your Mbappe's and your Haalands? Like, there's no one better. So why not give him this starting position? It's really about not signing a striker, is really about giving Rodrigo the starting role alongside Bellingham and Vinicius. And so, but theoretically, he would be the odd man out if you were to sign a striker potentially, or another midfielder gets sacrificed. But I think it's about giving this kid who deserves to be a starter now the full-on opportunity, and his numbers really excite me.
So we kind of spoke about this a while back. I think it was last season when you wrote your article about Kvara versus Rodrygo. And my train of thinking with Rodrygo has always been like, he is good enough to start for Real Madrid, but he's kind of like, I feel like going to be the odd man out also. Like if we sign somebody else, like another star attacker. And it's just kind of the nature of the game, be it fair or unfair. Like when you think about like Guti, who came off the bench so much for Real Madrid, but was also clearly good enough to start every game if it required him to. I feel like Rodrigo is similar in that regard. I also think it's very tricky once you start getting past the elite strikers that you'd want to sign for this position. Are there players who are better than Rodrigo that you could sign? I think that is true. Yes, there are better players. The question is always, and this is where squad building, I think, gets a little bit tricky, and I think some fans forget, is that is a player being marginally better than Rodrigo worth kind of hindering his development? And I think that's a question that the board has to weigh. And it's not always easy. And I know I know a lot of fans say, well, like we need depth. I know that's true. But again, like if the option is, for example, 200 million for Osimhen, to start over Rodrigo, there's like the board rightfully would turn that down, right? So these things are a little bit difficult to juggle. But I do want to ask another question of you that is related to this, because we're talking about Bellingham, Rodrigo, and Vinicius being so efficient at breaking lines with their dribbling. Is there a formation that would work where you had all three of them plus a striker in the fold that would maximize the creative output of all these three?
You mentioned it. A 4-2-3-1 would work. You're obviously sacrificing a midfielder, and that's where we're squad heavy right now and where we do have the depth. So would I recommend making that change right now with this current squad? I don't know that I would, given what we've seen, early signs of the diamond, and what we have just with this squad. But yeah, I think a 4-2-3-1 would work, and you'd have a major selection headache on who the two guys are behind Bellingham. And I think one more point on the Rodrigo thing. I think he fits this squad and complements players much better than like an Osimhen would, or some of these other names that have been put out there. And I think maybe still, as much as we try to promote his quality and like point to all the numbers, but I still think to a degree he's underrated. And like I think he's bigger than a Guti super sub role. And like Florentino Perez, I always find it very, very interesting that Florentino Perez always says Vinicius or Rodrigo can win the Ballon d'Or in the future. Like he always puts the two together. And so it shows how highly he rates him. And I just think, I'm too bullish on him, and maybe I kind of am overestimating his talent. But from what I've seen from him over the last season and a half, I think, to your point, there's more than enough there to be a Real Madrid starter. And I think like greater than the Guti role where he gets sacrificed. Like I think he'll show this season that he'll be undroppable.
I think this conversation with Rodrigo would be a lot easier if he was a great goal scorer. I mean, this would be really easy. Like, well, you can just put him false nine and he'll score 20, 25 goals a season. And in addition to him being a great line breaker, can also put up goals like that. Maybe he can, by the way. Like, I won't discount it completely. He's shown in the past, I mean, specifically in the Champions League, if we're being honest, that he can put away a minimal amount of chances that he gets and be crazy efficient. The question is, can he do that over a long course of a domestic season? And because if you ask him to be a goal scoring contributor from the wings, that's great. I mean, he's really good at that. If you're asking him to be a main goal scorer, that's something he hasn't proven he can do yet. But maybe that doesn't matter as much if you have Vinicius, Rodrigo, and Bellingham all scoring, a combined, let's say, 60 goals combined over the course of a season, then it won't matter as much. And I guess that brings me to another question. Maybe we can, like, I tend to agree with your optimism, generally speaking, by the way. Like I'm more on the positive side, because as much as I wanted a striker and I shouted it for the rooftops, I will continue to say it's like in a Champions League knockout double game, like a KO game, or even in the course of a season, I'd say there are less than a handful of teams that I would say, and even then I'd have to really think about it, that are better than us, even without a striker. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, because Lucas and I had a discussion about it, about like whether or not Bellingham can sustain it. And I know it's easy to say Bellingham can't sustain it because he's not a striker. And quite frankly, even if he was, I think it would be hard to sustain anyway, because then you're talking about like Haaland level production, scoring 5 goals in 4 games and doing that over the course of a season. But I think there's a part of me, and this is the optimistic side of me, that thinks maybe it is sustainable, more sustainable than we think, only because the only reason I say this is because, first of all, Bellingham can finish. Like that part of that's not going to go away. He can do that. And the other thing that's not going to go away, Matt, is he is going to get like a clear-cut, at least 1 or 2 clear-cut chances per game because of his intelligence and movement off the ball. So what do you think? Can he sustain that?
The current goal scoring ratio, I don't think he'll sustain, but I agree with Ancelotti that I think he'll get 15 goals at least. And you mentioned the 60 goal mark between the three of them. I mean, Rodrigo and Vinicius got 20 last season. I don't doubt they'll reach that figure again and get a little bit higher than that, actually. So if they each get 20 plus 15 for Bellingham, you're already at 50, or you're already at 55. It's just 5 more goals, and so I could easily see that happening. And that's just the 3 of them. So I think it's there. And one thing that stayed in my mind that Pep Guardiola has said in previous seasons, and I brought this up, he said it last season. I brought this up on the podcast before, and part of the reason why he made this switch to the 4 center backs playing in his defense, and obviously they're not all playing center back, but he wanted out and out defenders. He said at the Champions League level, at the highest level, it's about winning duels 1v1, and we weren't winning duels. And so what I think Vinicius, Rodrigo, and Bellingham do that arguably no other team on the planet has this type of quality in the final third, is that they could take those defenders on, and probably, even if they only win half their duels or beat their man half the time, they're going to create opportunities. And I think there's no system, like it's not like a system-based approach. It's pure ingenuity, pure creativity from these guys, pure kind of unpredictability, which can only be scouted so much. They're just that good that they can take you on one-on-one off the dribble. And so that's where like we deviate away from the systems-based approach. But I think this is where, especially at the highest level, I think it will only help us. And I think when you're taking on the elite defenders, and you got those guys that Guardiola has positioned in spots where they're probably some of the best 1v1 defenders in the world, I think you're just increasing your chances of beating those type of defenders and those type of systems.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're talking about all those young legs up front, something that we still have been asking for, because you have the profile of players to do it this year, is to press more. We've kept a pretty high line this season. If you look at the numbers, we are 8th in passes per defensive action. So we're still not nearly as aggressive as Barcelona in terms of our press. But I think we have the ability to sustain it now, and we have been decently aggressive. And I think our counter press has been amazing. And this is maybe not a direct causation to scoring more goals, but maybe an underrated one that has nothing to do with the attack. There's a part of me that thinks that having Tchouameni as a consistent starter of the season actually helps our offense. And I'm not just talking about like the ball progression from the back, which he's been very good at this season so far, but his counter pressing and his pressing has been very good from that position. And if you have him, plus you have all the young midfielders, plus Vinicius, Rodrigo, and then you have the depth to come in off the bench and to swap in some fresh legs to sustain the press, I think Tchouameni can be a really good organizer in helping us win balls high up the pitch and generate some artificial attacking transition opportunities. So I actually look at Tchouameni and think this guy helps our offense a lot. But I'm generally like, I do side with your optimism in a lot of ways. I'm just kind of worried still about the sustainability.
Well, yeah, and I think to your point there on the counter pressing, I think we saw that against Celta especially. And I mean, it's just, why do teams press high now? Why is that like the big rule of thumb? And why do so many teams want to implement it? Because the higher you win the ball at the pitch, the closer you are to the opposition's goal, the less work you have to do to score a goal. And so I think that's why, and I think we're going to be a team that maybe doesn't press or counter press like 24/7, but we're going to pick and choose our moments. And which I personally think is the best way to do it, because you conserve energy and you keep yourself from being, if it doesn't go right, you keep yourself from being torn apart. So I agree with you. I think you can push this out to just like the whole setup of the team and the general tactics as well. Like that's what makes you kind of more optimistic. And I think the other thing that I pointed out in the article is that Ancelotti has strategically positioned these guys centrally, closer to goal. Like Vinicius isn't picking up the ball in his own half anymore. Maybe once or twice, whereas he used to do that like 6, 7, 8 times a game. Now he's much closer to the goal, and he's conserving his kind of explosive sprints and his energy to be in that central final third. And we've talked ad nauseum already about some of the runs he makes and how it's not that different. What I do think, though, is maybe his output won't be as in terms of like the number of take-ons, the number of crosses, the number of Total assists won't be quite as high, but I think rather than the quantity, I think the quality of his opportunities he gets will be higher, and I do think he'll score more goals, and I do think he'll get better chances. Like, I bet his overall XG come the end of the season is much higher than it was last year. You're on mute.
Awesome. That's fixed. Yeah, it's possible. It's very possible. It does hurt us that he's not in the field, but we're kind of lucky that there's a couple international breaks here to buy us some time until he comes back. You just going back to the press, we talk about, like, you spoke about the just why, like, a press and why teams press, and the ability to not only create more chances, but also to shield, like, so you don't concede as many defensive opportunities, our chances in transition, rather. Think about, like, how good of a job do you think we've done in limiting how many big chances we concede? Like, how many saves have Kepa and Lunin actually had to make? Has Kepa been tested that much? I feel like we've done a really good job. I don't know why, but there's almost part of me that thinks, like, if Courtois was there, we would have noticed him more, because we would have been a little bit more, I don't know. I don't really know. I can't prove it, but it just almost feels like when Courtois is on the field, like, he's being constantly tested with these massive saves. We've done a really good job of limiting the chances that Kepa has had to face, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming out of preseason, that was our concern. Like, we liked actually what we saw from the offense, but we were giving up goals pretty easily, and the press was getting through. I mean, teams were getting through it pretty easily, and so I do think that's improved. I don't know that we played really that great of teams yet, especially from a final third standpoint.
Yeah.
But I think Real Sociedad is going to be a great test, and it's always a fun game when they come to the Santiago Bernabeu. So I think that will be a good game. But yeah, I want to see, like, so far I feel positive about the start of the season, but as we always like to caution, like, it's early days. It's only been 4 games, 4 games, and yeah, just we need some bigger tests are definitely coming in the next few weeks with Real Sociedad, Atleti, Champions League.
Yeah, definitely. I will say, like, to be fair to us, and all that is true, by the way, like, Real Sociedad is going to be our biggest test so far. I will say, to our credit, San Mamés and Balaidos were tough places to play.
Yeah, to do all this away is no easy feat.
Yeah. So, given that we're back home, and Getafe, obviously not a team what you would associate with a masterclass or difficult to play, but considering they kicked the shit out of us for 90 minutes and we should have had 2 penalties, I would say that one, we did well to scrape that one out too. But yeah, I think you'll start to see when Real Sociedad rolls into town, that'll be tough. Atletico away, Atletico depends what version you get, but so far this season they've looked really good. They will certainly test us. Then you're getting into the Napoli range in October. Barca also, there's also a Clasico in October. So that's when you kind of start to see more of the test. But I think so far so good. We can only measure what we've seen so far. And I think it's right. And I think it's okay and fair to be worried about the bigger tests. For example, attacking star wingers who might go at Carvajal and test them more. That's one example. But so far so good. Is there anything else, Matt, that you feel like we didn't touch on?
No, I think we talked about most of it. I think the Rodrigo point, especially just where he's landing in these metrics, was something I didn't get to push as much in the article, so I did want to kind of make that point today.
Yeah. I think a lot of this season is kind of hanging on him too. How does he step up? It's going to be huge, and he's going to have the opportunity, obviously, because I think he's going to play a lot of minutes. So, this is maybe the continuity he needs and the confidence he needs. And I just hope he can stand up, and I believe in him. I think, you and I have been high on Rodrigo for a while, and I have always felt that some of the reason why he isn't touted as some of the other starters around Europe is precisely the reason that he hasn't been starting consistently. So I hope Rodrigo can come good, and I have faith in him. Matt, I wanted to just announce a couple things really quickly before I let you go. So a lot of users in India have been unable over the years to join us on Patreon, and they really wanted to. Some in India have found a way around that, but it's been challenging. And it's not just people in India, but India, I know for sure. So we've opened up YouTube memberships. So if you want access to our Patreon and you can't, YouTube memberships seems to be a way around that problem. So you can go there and sign up. I'll just put the link in the show notes, and you guys can do that if you wanted to become a patron. You haven't been able to. So I also wanted to give a shout out, Matt, before I let you go, to our $10 plus patrons. So if any of our patrons, all of our patrons access our entire bonus catalog, but if you pledge $10 or more, you get some more rewards like guaranteed responses to your questions. You also get specific shout outs on the podcast. So shout out to these people who give us $10 or more per month. Lots of love to you guys. Brandon Alvarez, Willie Reed, Will Sousa, Wamik Jamal, Walker Kuvan, Tobias Royo Botcher, Tahmid Kalam, Sushank Tamala, Sujai Wani, Sumanshu Singh, Sheikh Hatiri, Sergio Arispe, Santos Solorzano, Samuli Justin, Samer Z, Sai Mohan, Sasi Kumar. That's all the S's out of the way, so I can get my list out of the way. Rishi D, Phoenix, Peter Powell, Paulo Fierro, Patrick Diafati, Oscar Barrera, Nico Laxo, Nicholas Moeller, Nick Ribeiro, Nelson Masariego, Naveen Babu, Ramesh Babu, Mowgli, MJ Diego, Michael Zinberg, Marin Myrtle, Matthew Atkins, Martin Ridman, Magnus Lex, Logan Stahl, Leon Savernakis, Kunal Tilakar, Kevin Rivera, Jose Osorio, Jose Cruz, John Fernandez, Jeff Soa, Jason Fitz, Jacob P., Ian Marley, Howard Moore, Graham Gerard, Gary Kohut, Frederick Rantakiro, Frederick Sundros, S.A. Davisito, Eloy Enriquez, Edward Sossman, Daniel Williams, Connor McMorrow, Christian Toff, Christian Acosta, Brendan Powers, Brandon Stevens, Arnab Mukherjee, Armin Gashi, Armando L., Anthony Tharp, Andres Silvestre, Ananya Kumar, Alex Steiberg, Azaz Hussein, Adar Zalikovic, Adam Dorsey, Bella Chow, Varun, Ramtin Mahrur, Primo, Fabian Moreno, and Daniel Smith. Thank you so much for your support. Matt, thanks for taking a little bit of a time on your work break. I know you could have been doing other things on your work break, like eating a nice meal, having a nice coffee, relaxing in the park, but you chose to do this instead. So thanks, buddy.
Yep. Thanks, Kiyan.
All right. Take care. Peace.
Bye.